So here we go, starting up the new semester, and this is on the church, right? The church. We're not talking about the history of the church mainly for this semester. This semester we're going to go to why the church, right? Why does Christ establish the church? The Catholic Church, for those non-Catholics and for those Catholics, right? Good to understand why the Catholic Church says that the Catholic Church isn't just an option. It's not just something that we can do. It's not just something that's come along and developed to help us learn about Christ, but that the Catholic Church is an essential element of Christ's plan of redemption. That the Catholic Church is what God established through Jesus Christ in order for us to be in communion with Him as He intended from the beginning. That is the view of the Catholic Church on why it is there. Not as an optional thing, but as an essential element and an extension of God's plan of redemption. So this first chapter is going to start just like last chapter did. Redemption, we talked about, right, our sin, our need for redemption, how the redemption happens in Jesus Christ, how we continue to kind of tap into that redemption through the church, right, and how we're supposed to live that redemption. That was all the foundation for this semester. And this semester goes all the way back to the beginning again with Genesis. And it looks at Genesis, and as last semester we looked at Genesis and saw how God was preparing the way for Jesus Christ and the way He redeems, right? Because we sin. Well, this semester and this first chapter goes all the way back to the covenants in Genesis, and so we look at it again. But don't roll your eyes and say, oh man, we looked at it again, now we got to go through the same exact stuff. But we look at it with a new perspective, okay? So we're going to go back with the knowledge of the redemption that we have, but now we're also going to look at it and see, does God prepare the way, and does God point out not just Christ as we saw before, but does He also prepare the way for the church and help prepare us for what the church is all about? So we go back to Genesis and we go back to the Old Covenants. And we see how the Old Covenants don't just point towards Christ and the redemption, but also point towards Christ and His church and the redemption. And it's never a separate issue, but it's always the same. That's what this chapter is all about. Saying how every time we see the Old Testament pointing towards Christ, it really fits and shows that it's pointing towards Christ and the church. That the and the church is an essential connection to Christ that has been planned from the very beginning. So what we saw in the very beginning was that God is a God of love and mercy, right? His forgiveness is unending, right? And so He sets up these covenants, we break them, we sin over and over, and God offers a new covenant, ultimately with Jesus Christ, right? So when we go back to the beginning, this is what we see. That God from the very beginning, and highlight this, make sure you write this down, this is the key point right here for this chapter, is that from the very beginning, God intended man to be in communion with Him. And Jesus Christ enables us, right, to be forgiven, and He pours out the grace of the Holy Spirit so that we can receive God within us and be in communion with Him as was intended at the beginning, having that grace and that union with God, God's very self within us. And the church is essential because from the very beginning, Christ gives that grace, and our communion with that grace on earth is what the church is, right? So at the very beginning, God intended that Christ and His church are what enable us to be in communion with Him and have forgiveness of sins and to stay in communion with Him. So this chapter goes through the Old Covenants and looks at now not just Christ and the redemption, but looks at evidence for the church. So keep that in mind. Scavenger hunt this chapter.